We will often confuse ourselves with God. And I say this now because often, so very often, we think that God thinks in the way that we do, and then we attach meanings to the Torah that are not there. In this week's Torah reading, which is the second Sidra in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, called Tzav, we deal with the sacrificial rites. And the sacrifices, of course, are well known to everybody, reader of the text as well as somebody who's illiterate in it. An animal is brought to the Kohen, to the priest. The animal is sacrificed up on the altar. And then we are told in this particular Torah reading, this parsha, that the animal is to burn all night long and then finally to be consumed totally on the altar by morning. So what relevance does this have to us? And for those people who want to be critical about the text, and sometimes I think it's important to be critical, what relevance does it have for any human being to offer up a sacrifice on an altar? Granted, this hasn't been done for 2 millennia, but what is the purpose of it, and why do we keep rereading this passage year after year? What import, what meaning does it have to our lives today, now, when this is just a footnote of human history? Some of the greatest sages have said that sacrifices are offered not for the sake of God, but for the sake of humanity. Take, for example, this insight. When a sacrifice was offered, it was offered in terms of its whole self. Much in the same way, every human being that would bring a sacrifice to the altar of God would do so because they felt pangs of guilt, pangs of conscience, a desire to want to be or do something that one felt incapable of being or doing. And so in this Torah reading, when an individual comes before God to the altar, to the Kohen with a sacrifice, they're going because they need to do something. It's not necessarily that God smells the sweet savor of the aroma wafting upward, that God needs a hamburger in order to satisfy his desires. That kind of anthropomorphism does not exist within the context of the deepest meanings of the text. However, we need to do it. One of the greatest sages was once confronted by his student who said, "Rabbi, I don't understand why it is that we pray all the time. I mean, God has so many people on earth, all of which ask for things, thank God for things, want things, desire, hope, aspire, and God has to listen to these prayers all the time. Doesn't God get tired of our incessant praying?" And the rabbi answered that God tolerates, not because God needs it, but because God knows how much we need it. And that really is the essence of the sacrificial rites that we're reading about today. We bring our body and our soul to the altar because we feel the need to become whole before God. And God says, have it your way. As you need it, so it will be. And so we bring our sacrifices and we read of the animals that were brought in past times, and we wonder, what is the reckoning that we do today? Well, the reckoning is the full soul that we bring before God. Now they may not be animals, but they must be deeds. They must be words. They must be something that is sated with meaning. Think about for a moment having offended a friend or a relative. We say something out of turn that we should not have said, and then immediately feel pangs of guilt. What's the remedy for that? The remedy is to say to ourselves as we're walking away, we shouldn't have said that, or justifying ourselves. They had it coming to them, they shouldn't have said it to me first. Well, the real religious being knows that if we did something wrong, we have to make it right. That if we said something out of turn, it's our responsibility to confront that pain and to say, I made a mistake, will you forgive me? This is the whole religious underpinning of the text. We need to learn about the sacrificial rites because they're not a distant anachronism in the footnote of time, but rather they're very much alive as we are, with our needs to become whole, to ourselves, with our soul, before God, before one another. And so we study the ancient texts. Even if they're no longer physically done, we learn what we must do in order to practice the policy of wholeness. Shabbat Shalom.